The Nintendo DS has a lot of hidden games that usually go unnoticed due to the console's large library, so in this video I want to show off 10 hidden gems that you probably aren't going to see anywhere else. So in first at number 1 we've got XG Blast. This is a shoot 'em up game that plays a lot like Geometry Wars while putting its own spin on the music and visuals. In terms of the controls, they're quite simple, with you using the D-pad to move the spaceship around while using the 4 buttons on the right to fire lasers. The main premise of the game is that it's a survival shooter where waves of enemies are constantly coming at you while you try and maneuver and take them out. As mentioned before, it is very similar to Geometry Wars in concept, but it stays different enough with its style and design. Now there is one flaw when it comes to XG Blast, but it doesn't actually come from its gameplay, but rather its cover art. I have no idea why the developers chose to use a stock image design for the cover art, but it does not do a very good job showing off what the game is, leaving many to assume it was just another shovelware title. So if you're like me and many others and you didn't know about this game back in the day, I'd highly recommend checking it out now, especially if you're a fan of shoot 'em ups. And so up next at number 2 we've got Chrono Twins. Originally, the DS version of this game never ended up releasing in North America, instead coming out much later on the DSi. Yet for the sake of this video, I want to focus on the DS version that released in Europe because I believe it's a really cool game that many people missed out on. Chrono Twins is an interesting concept as it's a dual screen platformer that has you controlling one twin on each screen. The whole gimmick is that one character is in the present and one character is in the past, basically making this game about time travel sort of. In terms of the gameplay, it does take a bit of getting used to, but after about an hour you'll start to get the hang of it as the controls are pretty simple and easy to use. One of my favorite parts about Chrono Twins is its clever use of puzzles, as they are really different from most games, and the task of solving problems on both screens is both challenging and fun. All in all, Chrono Twins is a unique game that is perfectly played on the DS, so if you haven't tried it before, I highly recommend you do. And so in at number 3 is Contact. This one is an RPG game that comes from the famous publisher Atlas and was designed by Akira Ueda, who is fairly well known when it comes to RPGs. The storyline begins with a professor crash landing onto a strange planet where he then meets a boy named Terry, who is the person you end up controlling. It's a weird storyline, but it doesn't take itself too seriously at all, and I thought the game was quite funny, sort of feeling like Earthbound at times. When it comes to the gameplay, Contact is fairly straightforward in terms of being a simple RPG. In fact, I'd say one of the biggest downsides of this game is probably that simplicity when it comes to the combat system, as it doesn't require you to do all that much. Still, even with that downside, the story and other gameplay aspects completely make this game worth playing on their own, so if you've never given Contact a try before and you enjoy Earthbound style RPGs, this is definitely one to consider. And so, in at number 4 is Resident Evil Deadly Silence. This one is probably a little more known just because of its attachment to the RE series, but I still don't see it very often. Deadly Silence is an enhanced port of the original Resident Evil on the PS1 with a lot of added features. It contains an entirely new mode known as Rebirth, which adds more enemies and brand new puzzles that are specifically designed for the DS's hardware. In terms of original content, it's also all here, included in the classic mode, which has everything, even keeping the original voice acting. When it comes to new features, there are also a ton of new additions, with some of my favorites being the use of the DS's touchscreen in knife battles and the inclusion of multiplayer co-op. Both of these features do a good job at making the game feel like an entirely new experience, especially when considering how extra content is also hidden away in this one. So if you like Resident Evil or you want a horror survival game on the DS, Resident Evil Deadly Silence is a good choice. And so at number 5 we've got New Zealand Story Revolution. This game is a recreation of an older arcade game originally made by Taito, and well, if you know anything about Taito, back in the day they were pretty popular for making a lot of great arcade games, with New Zealand Story being one of them. Yet even with that said, sometimes recreations do not live up to the hype, but luckily this one actually does. For starters, the game is a platformer that has you tasked with trying to get to the end of the level in order to save your little Kiwi friends. The main catch is that you die in one hit, so you have to be very careful not to die. Now luckily this game does give you ways to fight, providing you with tons of different weapons and pickups, which you will definitely need, especially when fighting against the bosses. All in all, New Zealand Story Revolution is a fun platformer, and it does a good job at making use of both screens and staying different from other titles, so if this one interests you at all, I'd highly recommend you give it a try. And so at number 6 is Hot Wheels Beat That. When researching this game further, I discovered that most people played it on their home consoles and realized that not many even knew it was on the DS. Looking at IGN's review of this game, it confirms that, as they don't even have the DS console shown, which is kind of strange and unfortunate as the game is a lot better than you'd expect. When I played it for the first time, it sort of reminded me of Stunt Racer on the N64 due to it having a lot of crazy tracks and power-ups. This game is an arcade racer, and it's successful in doing what it does, making it great for quick sessions of gameplay. Now of course no game is perfect, and while Hot Wheels BT is definitely not, due to the game being somewhat shallow in content, still even with the lack of content, the core gameplay is fun, and I think this title succeeds in achieving what it sets out to do, so if you like arcade racers and you want one to quickly play through, Hot Wheels Beat That is a good one to consider. And up next at number 7 we have Dementium II. When it comes to the DS, I don't think many people affiliate it with the survival horror game genre. I for one never thought this kind of game would work on the DS, mainly because of its limitations, yet after playing this game, I was definitely proven wrong. Dementium II somehow makes the genre work on the DS, providing players with a first-person view as they use their flashlight and different weapons. The main story of the game is that you have to escape a hospital as you slowly are dipping into insanity. It's certainly not a deep story, but later on in the game it does get a little more detailed, and I'd say it's worth holding out for. What I appreciate most about Dementium II has to be its quality of life improvements. Being able to simply pull up a map is great, and I also really like the option of dual wielding your gun and flashlight. It's these small little changes that really make the game stand out, and it helps make it feel a lot more open-ended. So if you like horror games and you want a definitive one for your DS, think about trying Dementium 2. And so in next at number 8 we have Master of the Monster Lair. This one's another Atlas title that plays off the premise of making your own dungeon. The story goes that you are a boy who discovers a magic talking shovel that convinces you to design dungeons to lure and trap monsters. It's a weird story, and it's one of those games where the best part about it is definitely more so on its core gameplay. Being able to make your own dungeon is very addicting, and this game does a good job at keeping the gameplay different. For starters, at the beginning of every morning, you'll be buying new supplies for your dungeon, as well as going through and clearing out the monsters within it. The design of the dungeon really ends up determining how difficult the game will be, and I do like that you're able to choose how you want your dungeon to perform. Along with all of that, there is also a battle system which is fairly straightforward, and recipes which when learned help level up your character's stats. Overall, Master of the Monster Lair is a super fun idea, and while it can be slow at times, it's still a really good title. So if you like dungeon crawlers and you want to build your own, be sure to check this one out. And so at number 9 we've got Geometry Wars Galaxies. In this video we previously talked about XG Blast, and while that game is great, Geometry Wars Galaxies usually sits at number 1, at least for me when it comes to arcade shooters. Now the reason I'm claiming this game to be hidden is because I feel like a lot of people skipped it back in the day, and it might have been overshadowed by its Wii version. Galaxies on the DS is a multi-directional shooter, and it lets players use either the D-pad or the stylus for controlling their ship. The game's main premise is that you have to clear planets which all have their own special characteristics, such as enemies and obstacles. On top of the core game, there's also a multiplayer game mode included within the DS version, which lets one person spawn waves of enemies while the other player has to fight them off. Geometry Wars Galaxies is a simple but good-looking game that does an excellent job at keeping up with the more advanced Wii version, so if you like these kinds of titles or you've never tried one before, this is a good place to start. And so lastly at number 10 is freshly picked Tingles Rosy Rupeeland. This game was originally released in Japan and then was surprisingly brought over to Europe, which caught a lot of people off guard. Tingles Rupeeland is a part of the Zelda series, and it's an action-adventure game where you play as Tingle, whose main goal is to collect rupees. To collect these rupees, you will have to explore different areas from the Zelda universe, as well as dungeons which have bosses at the end of them. Along with that, this game has a fair amount of side content such as customization, item crafting, and the ability to hire your own different types of bodyguards. It's no doubt a weird game, but it's executed in such a way that really makes you want to see what's coming next. Yet no game is perfect, and when it comes to me, I'd say my only complaint with this one is its bargain system. The idea of negotiating when buying and selling is super cool, but in reality, it just basically ends up being a guessing game, and that can kind of be frustrating after a while. Still, even with that downside, everything else is a really good time, and it's awesome that this title even left Japan, so if the thought of playing a game centered around Tingle intrigues you, then you're probably gonna have a really good time with this one, and I'd highly recommend it. And so that is the end of this video. I've always been a big fan of the Nintendo DS, and I've been looking for new games to play on it, and I wanted to share some recommendations that other YouTube channels are probably not going to promote. Still, as always, I'm sure I missed a ton of good DS games, so if you have any recommendations for hidden titles, please let me know down in the comments below. And well, with that said, thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe if you enjoy my kind of content, and I will see you very soon. Take care.